Hey, what's up guys? On today's project, I'm going to show you how I installed this tile floor in my bathroom. I'm going to get up now. Hey everybody, this is episode 6 in my bathroom renovation series, in which I took the half bath you just saw and completely converted it into the full bath you're seeing now. So check out my channel if you want to see more projects in that transformation. The first step in your tile job is to prepare the substrate. So I took a damp sponge and wetted the plywood, and then I applied my thin set, and then I used the Ditra substrate to actually be my backer for where I was going to apply the tile. You can use cement board, but in this application I went with Ditra. The next step is planning. So in terms of the orientation of these Hexagon tiles, I didn't know which way to go. So after some deliberation, I decided to go with the diagonal orientation, and then it was a matter of just dry fitting. So you're gonna have to cut the tile along one of the edges to make it flat where you start your dry fit. So here I am making that mark, and then I took it outside to my tile saw to cut that straight across. So that's how I took care of those flat cuts that you're seeing right now up against the shower curb. But there are also going to be some other applications where you got to do some custom cuts. So here I am making that measurement, and then again I'm going to go ahead and scribe that measurement over onto my tile before going outside and making that custom cut on the wet tile saw. And here I am taking the tile back inside to make sure that my cut was done correctly. And I'm putting those spacers in place, which I'll give you more info on now, but so far it looks like the cut was done correctly. So for my tile leveling system, I went with something called the Spin Doctor, which is basically a combination spacer and leveler all in one. So those are the little black things that you're seeing me put in place. Those are getting my spacers, and then later on, once the tiles are actually set, I'll go ahead and crimp down with the actual spin part to make sure there's no lippage. But here I am continuing with the dry fit to make sure that everything looks good. And the dry fitting is really the hardest part of most of these tile jobs. What I'm doing here is I'm installing the threshold, I'm making my mark, and then I'm making my mark on the threshold where I'm going to need to cut that with the oscillating tool. And I'm cutting that with the oscillating tool right now. Then I went and cut the threshold with the wet saw, and here I am just sliding it in place once the cut was made correctly. So that's going to be a step you might encounter, and that's how you take care of it. The next step here is just to go ahead and cut out those final dry cuts to make sure everything fits. So the way I'm doing that is I put the spacer under the threshold, and then I'm making the mark of where I'm going to need to actually cut the tile, and I'm using a Sharpie there to do it. And then I head over to the other side of the tile and make a mark before actually going outside and cutting that tile with the wet saw. So taking those two marks, I'm going to go ahead and scribe it here, and then it's just a matter of cutting it with the wet saw. And you might need to do a couple of creative cuts like you're seeing there to get around the threshold or other obstacles. And the way I did that is, again, I just took my wet saw and kind of switched it around, scribed out the line, moved it, and then you might need to do a little bit of cleanup work where you snap it and you kind of have those rigid lines on the inside corner. And the way that I did that is with a Dremel tool with a diamond blade, or you can use an angle grinder, again with a diamond blade. So that's just an example and something you might have to take care of. So going in and completing the final bit of dry fitting, and once I had all of the tiles in place, we were all set with the dry fit. So once all the tiles were laid, I took some tape and I labeled every single tile so that I could go and install them later on and know exactly where they need to go. So I recommend you do something similar. This just keeps everything in order and allows you to install them very easily and know where each tile needs to go when you actually go and install the tiles. So that's what I did there, and I recommend you do something similar. And now it's time to start actually laying these down for real. So at this point, remove all your tiles, give your Ditra a vacuum to make sure there's no debris, and then you're gonna need to mix up your thin set per the manufacturer's recommendation. So I use Schluter All Set to maintain the Schluter warranty for all the products, but make sure that you take into account the ratios and mix it proportionally. So here I am mixing my thin set in a bucket and then with a drill mixer, and now it's time to apply it. So at this point, I'm heading inside. I'm taking a square notch, 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch trowel and applying the thin set to the Ditra. I recommend that you only do one line at a time, and once you have all of the notches combed in, you're going to take your tiles, take your spacers, and actually lay the tiles in place. So the tile laying process is actually pretty iterative. You're just going to go ahead and take your spacers and then put them in place and then lay your tiles appropriately. Something to note is that I did back butter my tiles, but I actually found that I had a lot of excess thin set. So you might find it better to actually apply a little less thin set to the Ditra and maybe a little less to the back buttering of your tiles. At this point, I'm doing a couple more of the spacers and applying my tiles in place as we've done before. And at this point, I put down a couple of those plastic spin spacers to make sure that there was no lippage at the top and that everything was even all the way across. So you'll cinch these down just to make sure that everything is level and flat all the way across so you don't have any lippage in your tile installation. Something to note here is that you really should clean as you go and try to keep a neat workspace. I had a little bit of thin set that would dry on top of the tiles and also in the grout lines, and that's just a really big headache when you go to actually apply grout later on. So if you learn anything from this video, please just clean up the thin set as you go. Make sure all your grout lines are free of thin set, and also make sure the faces of your tile are wiped down when the thin set is still wet. And here I am, just continuing on with the tile installation, laying the spacers down and putting the Hexagon tiles in place. It pretty much takes care of itself if you did a good job with your dry fitting. And here I am just cinching down those plastic spacer rings to make sure, again, there's no lippage and that all of the adjacent tiles are flat and level with each other. So switching the camera angle here, but again doing the exact same thing over and over again. It's applying the thin set, it's combing out your notches, and then applying the tiles and the spacers just like we've done before. Tiling is pretty redundant. It's just the dry fitting, really, that's the hardest part. What you'll note there is I'm keeping about a 1/16 of an inch gap between the tiles and the wall, and I'm going to fill that with caulk later on, just kind of as an expansion gap. So you don't want to have it butt up completely flush against the walls in case there's any expansion later on. And here I am just doing the final leveling to make sure there's no lippage on these final tiles there. Just cinching that down just so it's tight enough. You don't need to over tighten it, but make sure it's tight enough so there's no movement. And what I'm doing here is I'm applying the thin set for the threshold, and then I took my marble threshold, back buttered it, and slid it under the door frame in place there. Then I went and finished up the rest of the tile installation and let it dry. After about 24 hours, you can come back and actually remove the spacers and knock those out. And they actually break free. You can either kick them with boots or you can use a rubber mallet, but that will kind of separate them. And here I am just going through and knocking all those loose. Again, you can see the dried thin set I had, which was a huge headache, so please clean that up as you go. What I'm showing here is that you can remove the red part of your spin doctor and reuse those for later. Here I am just kind of sweeping everything up, doing some housekeeping of the spacers that are no longer useful, and then I'm just removing the tape labels that I applied previously. And here's a look at the final installation before grout. I had to go back and scrape off some of that thin set, and then we actually used epoxy grout here, and we'll show how we did that in a previous video. But right now, here's a look at the final installation.
Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I really would appreciate if you could drop a like down below for the YouTube algorithm, and also subscribe to the channel if you want to see more DIY projects like this, or how I did the rest of the projects in this bathroom here, whether that be the floating vanity there or the herringbone tile in the shower. Just please subscribe. There's tons more stuff coming your way. Thanks.